Shalom and welcome to another edition of Parsha Talk. I'm Rabbi Elliot Malamet in Highland Park, New Jersey, at the Highland Park Conservative Temple Congregation on Shemet. Joining me, my good friends, Rabbi Barry Chesler, Solomon Schechter Day School, Long Island, Rabbi Jeremy Kalmanowski of Anshe Chesed in New York City. It's great to see you. We have this amazing Parsha. We are now talking about Parsha Terumah, and it seems that we're really entering a new phase here. Okay, let's just give our viewers and listeners the context that they remember correctly, right? Last week, the people got the Book of the Covenant. There was a big covenant ceremony. There was some blood splattered on them. Prior to that, they said, Na'aseh v'nishma, we will do and we will hear, which we interpreted. And now, at the end of last week, God said to Moses, Ale elai hahara v'yesham, come up to me in the mountain, be there, and God is going to give him the Torah. Na lecha et luchot ha'evan. I'm going to give you the stones, the tablets of stone, va'torah va'mitzvah, the Torah and the law, the commandments. Katafti larotam. So very interesting. These stones are actual things that God wrote on, and we get the beautiful scene. The cloud comes over the mountain, and Moses stays there for 40 days and 40 nights, and it seems that while he's there, he gets the following commandments, which start off like this. Speak to the children of Israel, and you shall take for me an offering from every person who is so moved. You'll take my offering. And it goes on to list all the different objects of wealth, of precious value, things that are going to become part of the sanctuary. The capstone verse, Suli Mikdash, B'shachanti b'tocham. They shall make for me a sanctuary, and I shall dwell among them. So a reader and all of us are asking, well, what's going on here? What do you think is happening here? And why is this structure being instructed for us? Why do they need a structure? What role does it play? And why is God saying that they should have it? So, I mean, it's a big topic, big set of questions. I guess, Barry, you want to just tell me what's going on? You're the teacher here. We're the rabbis. What's going on here?
And by the way, Barry, we are literally sitting in your classroom, right? That's like your board
Yes.
behind you.
It was the last class I was in today.
So we are sitting in your classroom. Teach us, Yolamdeinu Rabbeinu.
And of course, we'll disagree with you.
Well, you should disagree with me, but I have to say something first.
Go ahead.
And what I would say, so we've talked about this before. I think Ramban is the one who emphasizes how the image of Sinai that we get in chapters 19 and 20 is a kind of template for the Mishkan, which is going to start now in chapter 25, the unfolding of the architecture and the furniture of the Mishkan. And it's as if Moses is told to take Mount Sinai, which is vertical, obviously, and lay it out flat, and we're going to make a building in that imprint. We're going to take Sinai with us to the best that we can. And I think, listening to you talk, one of the things that I find fascinating is the number of times that Moses is told, this is what I showed you. So, while he's up on Mount Sinai, we're used to thinking of Moses getting the Torah, but actually it seems that God has taken out his picture book and is showing Moses what he has to do on earth. And I think that in a way that is strikingly literal and physical, Moses is going to construct on earth a heavenly temple. And it's going to require the best that the people have within them, which is what the Terumah is going to be. And they're going to come forth, as we'll find out in the subsequent Parsha, with more stuff than they actually need.
Right.
Because you need that in order to bring God into the world. God is not a minimalist. He's a maximalist. He wants everything that you have, not just the bare minimum.
Jeremy, what do you think is going on here? Or just respond or come in anyway.
Well, first of all, I love the, Barry referenced the Ramban, and I loved the concept of the heavenly temple and the earthly temple. There's a midrashic trope that there's a Beit Mikdash Shamala mechuvan keneged Beit Mikdash Shamata. There's, as it were, a supernal temple and an earthly temple, and they align somehow, and what goes on the bottom affects and corresponds to what goes on the top. And that's an excellent sort of mythic and mystical reading of the kind which Nachmanides that's his wheelhouse. And there's another reading which Ramban is disagreeing with, which it appears in Rashi, which is that the story here of this parsha is related out of order. That the story of the golden calf in Exodus 32, 33, 34 actually is what happens next. Moses up on the mountain, 40 days, 40 nights, and then he delays, drags his feet coming down and dawdles. People get anxious, they make the golden calf. And then after that huge, catastrophe, then God says, essentially, I have to do something for this people, either to indicate that I'm not still mad, or I think a little bit more richly, I understand in a way that I didn't understand before that the people need something visual, something physical, someplace to go. And so I'm going to interpret the Rashi as saying that they need a place to go because either they're not ready, or maybe Homo sapiens are never ready to be purely abstract. They need some physical, visual, cooperative, in wood and stone and gold and silver and tchelet vargaman and the purple and the blue and the red and everything. He needs something physical. Now, of course, this is like really interesting because this is a religion that is very suspicious of visual stuff, and so in my own heart is more drawn to the Nachmanides reading, that it was always a plan to try to bring heaven to earth and to have a place where people can dedicate themselves to communion with God. But I think the other reading is pretty interesting too, right? That kind of need is like something that God has to respond to in a way that wasn't ideal in the first iteration, that God had to do it after they screwed up with the golden calf, give them the better version of something visual.
So if I understand what you're saying, then, and this is the Rashi position, and it's held by many in the tradition, that we're reading the story, we're reading the text a little out of order, that the Mishkan, the sanctuary, comes as a kind of antidote or a safety for the tendency to idolatry. Okay, but I want to put on let's pretend this is the first time I'm reading the Torah. Okay, and I'm an intelligent person, and the first time reading the Torah, I don't know any Rashi or anything, and I have so much suspense with Moses up on the mountain. He's there for 40 days, and I'm getting this presentation of what is essentially a structure, and I'm an intelligent person. I know structure. I have experience with a structure. I live in a structure. I live and I worship in a structure, and so perhaps the structure is to convey a narrative to me. After all, there is a visual and experiential. There's an architectural dialogue that takes place as anybody comes into your building, anybody comes into your home. So, Jeremy, I've been to your shul, you've been to my shul, right? And we, it's a place of grandeur. I mean, I can't explain it any other way. I mean, you're under construction now, but it's a beautiful, beautiful building. A person walks into your building and gets the experience of, well, I'll tell you what my experience was. It's, here are Jews, maybe 100 years ago, 90 years ago, on the Upper West Side, building a building, putting together their resources, trying to express in a tangible way their most cherished values of building community and worshiping God and creating something of awe and splendor. It's a gorgeous place. I don't know. What's the narrative?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting to think about because it's almost exactly, the building was built in 27, 28. So it's almost exactly 100 years old, well, not 90 plus years old. And, it's interesting to think about because there is a narrative about community and spirituality. There's probably a narrative of what it meant to be a very bougie Jewish community on West End Avenue in 1928 and their own sense of success. You also, you also tell a story by how you sit, intimate, all frontal in a circle,
Absolutely.
all these things. And I think that at least one way to read the Mishkan is that it's like, first of all, it's hard to tell exactly what's going on from the narrative. It's somewhat imprecise, it's got a lot of details, but you don't know exactly what things look like. But it seems dazzling. The thing I'm always drawn to is all the woven fabrics of linen, which is kind of off-white, always going to be kind of off-white, and then the yarns, which are crimson and purple and blue with gold mixed in. I just think it's got to have been spectacular. And I think that there was I kind of imagining that in a world that was probably not so aesthetically rich, this place was just like mind-blowingly beautiful, right? The very best of human artistry and creativity was concentrated in this one spot. They probably were out in the world and they, it probably didn't smell very good and they had the goats and was dusty and they go in here and it's incense and it's light and it's precious metals and beautifully woven threads. And it maybe just persuaded them there is beauty in the world.
Okay, but maybe there is a narrative. Maybe there's another narrative, and I'll put this out to you, which is, you alluded to it with Ramban, the Nachmanides saying, and scholar, biblical scholarship kind of corroborates this, that the Mishkan is a representation of Mount Sinai. That just as Mount Sinai had different zones, the top of Mount Sinai where Moses encountered God, the hill, the lead up where the Kenim were, and the foot of Mount Sinai, which is where the people live. So too the Mishkan has it's composed of these different zones, the outer court where everybody could go, the inner court where just the Kohanim could go, and the Holy of Holies where the Kohen Gadol could go only once a year. And so there is a narrative here that someone, the average Israelite, it would be obvious to them that this is their traveling Sinai. Okay, and that the traveling Sinai has as its core narrative the covenant. So the Mishkan then is the symbol of the covenant in space. Barry,
Yeah, it's worth recalling that Mount Sinai, you get to God by going up. In the Mishkan, you get to God by going in. Two very different experiences.
Yes.
And the question is, are they parallel in any way? Are they comparable experiences? Can you really go up by going in? Can you reach God through, which is the statement that the Mishkan makes, that you can enter into the Kodesh HaKodeshim, the Holy of Holies, on Yom Kippur, if you're fortunate enough to be the high priest, and either see God or create smoke that will obscure God, but penetrate to God's presence, which is very different than climbing up a mountain, which by definition is a transcendent experience. You're over and above everything on one hand, and in the Mishkan, you're embraced by the inside.
So in this reading, then, I would go on this avenue in terms of the biblical theology. Sinai is a once event. There is no other event like Sinai. Okay, that any other revelation that takes place, any other conversation that takes place, between God and Moses in the desert, and any other conversation that takes place between God and any prophet throughout the prophetic period, it's not Sinai. And that
but what makes it not Sinai?
That it's not Sinai. Sinai is one place, one time, one moment. It's like it's not coming back. There's no, we are aspiring to it. The theology that we have as rabbinic Jews is that we want to listen to the voice from Sinai, but there's never going to be another Sinai. Just like there's never going to be another, I don't know, Gretzky.
But I think that's because we misunderstand Sinai.
No.
Yes.
I think this is the total understanding of Sinai.
Well, I think here we have to agree that you're simply wrong, Elliot. But this is what I want to say, and this is what I want you to react to, is that what makes Sinai the Sinai experience is that it's God talking to the entire people at once. That is what will never be replaced. But God does speak to individuals, and he's in constant communication with Moshe in the wilderness, except for the 38 years when he doesn't talk. And that part, I don't think rabbinic Judaism deals with. It doesn't attempt to bring us back to a national colloquy with God. It suggests that we reach God on our own and with small communities.
Exactly.
Well, I would say, first of all, that's incredibly vivid that you said that. First of all, there was one case where literally someone goes back to Sinai, and that's Elijah,
Right.
who goes back to Horeb to have a solitary revelation, and that's one that is very elusive because God is not in the earthquake, the wind, or the fire, but in the voice of silence, and Elijah picks up on that, which is by definition not only not communal, individual and not communal, it's also not full of laws and stuff like that. But rabbinic Judaism is in a sense like Chacham Adif Minavi. A sage is better than a prophet. Prophets are erratic, they're kind of weird, you don't necessarily trust them, you don't know how to evaluate. Any old person can say, Ko Amar Adonai, God told me this, and how do we know which ones to follow? And Rabbinic Judaism doesn't like that. Rabbinic Judaism, one of its most famous stories is Lo Bashamayim. This is social, this is communal, this is for us in the Beit Midrash, and you don't get to introduce because God said so into the course of your discussion. But interestingly, as you said about, how do we get the Zohar? One of the Zohar's favorite lines is, and nobody learned this Torah since, they'll tell some mystical teaching. Nobody has learned this Torah. It's revealed as nothing has been revealed since the day that Moses was at Sinai. So it's like all of these, mystical revelations are correlated to being like, here into Spain in the 13th century, an eruption of the Sinai spirit.
Absolutely. Sinai is the big bang of Jewish theology. It's never going to happen again. And we're only trying to hear the echoes of it. We're only trying to hear. And what Elijah is doing there as an individual is trying to find that and touch that and come close to it, and he can't. He doesn't have. He's the most powerful radio telescope that exists, and all he hears is a small voice. And the rabbis, I think we have to give them a lot of credit. Their revolution here is to amplify the words and to create the hermeneutical techniques for.
I want to suggest something else, though.
Go ahead.
I think, I was struck, Jeremy, when you said Chacham Adif Miyabi.
Only a Chacham can say that, by the way.
Well, Jeremy is a Chacham. So the Chacham represents stability. And the metaphor that we would use, that we were talking about before we started recording, is the Beit HaMikdash. The prophet represents the Mishkan, which has no foundation because it has to be carried. It's portable. And there's this great tension. And we were talking a little bit earlier about halakha and revelation, and this drive to codify everything into halakha is emblematic, I think, of the Beit HaMikdash and a kind of rejection of the image of the Mishkan as a meaningful symbol for our religion. And we can't really go back to the Bible in that sense. And maybe we need to look for avenues to do that.
We need a little bit more. Too much maximal stability drives it all out, right?
Yeah.
Too much keva, and it's all boring. Too much kavana, and it's all erratic.
Translate those terms for
Too
me.
much fixed form. It's just, it dries out all the life, all the fun and energy. But if it's all just kavanah, then it'll never turn into anything.
Okay, so what you're reflecting on is that there's a kind of paradox there. I mean, we want a space. I'm thinking now in the modern context. We have a community. I'm rabbi, you're rabbi, rabbis. And we enjoy the experience of space. That is to say, worshiping in a space, and we need that. And yet there's the paradox of that is, well, God is not only in the space, and yet God is part of the space. I mean, it's that paradox is reflected in the verse, Vasuli Mishkan v'shachanti betocham. They shall make for me a sanctuary, and I will dwell among them. And that, I think, bleeds over into other paradoxes, which is, can you have a fixed place, or do you have a mobile place? Do you have a centralized place? Do you have a place around? I mean, all of these things are playing themselves out here in this text. And then, of course, historically, it's destroyed. And so they have no place. And they have to invent places. I mean, I've said a lot here, but react anywhere you want to react on those. Any of those paradoxes or any of those themes here. Go ahead, Barry.
So as long as you put it the way that you did, one of the things I've been thinking about lately is what really was the greater tragedy, the destruction of the first temple or the second temple? What we call Judaism really is, in some sense, is a reaction to the destruction of the first temple. The scholars that I've been reading the last several years locate the beginnings of Judaism in the Persian period, and the Persian period being the paradigm for almost everything that comes afterwards. That if you want to understand Judaism, you have to understand what was going on in the Persian period, from the building of the second temple until the advent of the Greeks.
So just put that in the timeline for us. It's 586 BCE is the destruction of the first temple. The Persian period
takes a generation later. Say 538 is when Jews are allowed to come back to the land of Israel. The second temple was built, say, around 516. For those who like neat numbers, 70 years after the destruction, coincides with the prophecy of Jeremiah. And then the Hellenistic, whatever you want to call it, happening, 323 is the death of Alexander. And that's when the Seleucids and the Ptolemies take over the land that we're interested in. And what really was first temple Judaism, or not Judaism, first temple Israelite religion? What of that actually survives and becomes part of what we call second temple Judaism?
That's first of all, thank you for a spectacular historical rundown. Some of that stuff I didn't know, but I'll tell you, there's one thing of First Temple Judaism that survives strongly, and that is, the texts presumably receive the final editing after the destruction, but most of the prophets, the source texts of the Tanakh, a lot of them are First Temple texts. So it's true we don't do that stuff. The stuff that we do is later, but a whole lot of the stuff, as described in the Chumash and in the first section of Isaiah and in Jeremiah and in Micha and Amos and Hosea and all those folks, and lots of Tehillim, are First Temple texts.
Including, I guess, a huge chunk of the Book of Psalms, which probably was the liturgy of the First Temple, or as opposed to probably the first 4/5 of the Book of Psalms, right? Or okay, so we can see how complicated. I mean, I think what's so riveting about this parsha, even though there's no narrative here, is that it really causes us to have these questions. The questions of, what does a place mean, and what's going on in this place, and what does the average Israelite hope to accomplish when coming into that place. And how is that experience different from, let's say, the worshiper now who comes into the place? I would say the main narrative of coming into any of our synagogues is, I want to be with my community. I want to be with my community. I don't want to hear, I want to hear a nice chazan. I want to hear a decent sermon. I want to eat a nice kiddush. Maybe it's, I want to eat a nice kiddush. I don't know. What do you, but the
Depends on
narrative.
how nice the kiddush is.
Well, it depends, right? During normal times, that would be a big draw for people. But for a worshiper to come to the sanctuary, it's, I want to express some gratitude. I want to get some atonement. I want to be forgiven. I want to make amends. Right?
It's of course extremely hard for us, to the Bible presents a picture of religion, and they don't tell us what Joe Israelite thought. Presumably, the people who actually composed the texts were the most skilled writers, the most educated people. They were the elite class for sure. And Joe Israelite, it's hard for us to guess. Kodshim Kalim, the Shlamim sacrifices, the Nidavot, the Todot, all those kinds of sacrifices, free will offerings by people. That was the equivalent of eat a nice kiddush, presumably. They had a good kiddush. They did definitely, I would hope that. I think Parshat Terumah indicates Kol Asher Yidvenu Libo, everybody whose heart moves them to contribute, and as you said, as the rest of the Exodus will say, they brought even more than they needed. It was just great generosity. I would bet that they had a feeling of tremendous, fellowship and accomplishment in mutuality. But I also think there's one other thing, which is to my way of thinking, one of the biggest differences of biblical religion and today's religion, is that I think that the focus on ritual purity for ancient people, the focus on the temple not being a place of contact with death or decay, but being a place of life, that in the whole world, when people with lots of sickness and lots of physical deformity and all kinds of human suffering was out there in the world, in the Mishkan, and then later the Beit HaMikdash, would be places of ritual purity and cleanness and beauty and order. And I think that I'm imagining, based on the Bible's descriptions and the rabbis' understandings, that going to the sacred places that everybody could share in, that everybody cared about, it was a place where, yes, this is where the world makes sense, is safe, is full of life. And nowadays, I think that one of the things that the people want when they come into religious space is a little bit of that, here we are together in our brokenness. Everybody brings, nothing is as whole as the broken heart. And everybody, that people really don't like that the Kohanim have to be physically unblemished and the animals have to be unblemished. Come on, who's unblemished? As the rabbis say in the Midrash, God uses only broken vessels. Here we are, we're all broken vessels. I think people nowadays, that narrative is, we love you where you are, who you are. And I think the Bible is, we love you at your perfection.
That's fascinating. I think we could talk a lot about that. I think there another valence to this is, we come not to be in the world. We come to kind of turn off the world. The world is full of noise. The world is full of ugliness. The world is filled with a lot of despair, and we come into the sanctuary to leave some of that outside, especially on Shabbat. I'm thinking, as we're recording this, there's a big demonstration in Ottawa right now for our Canadian viewers, right? So Ottawa, the city is clogged up with a bunch of truckers. They're beating their horn, they're blaring their horns in the middle of the night, and where do you go for sanctuary when the world is going crazy, right? So yeah, that's part of the narrative. In addition to what it means so many different things to everybody. And so I'm saying that the Mishkan represents a narrative, the space represents a narrative, and it represents covenant in space, but it represents all of these different aspirations. Barry, I don't know if you have a kind of
No, I'm very struck by the conversation. It was just like I was enjoying listening.
Okay, so we didn't really go through the items, but we have 2 minutes left. Okay, so. The central item of the sanctuary is going to be the Aron. The Aron, so v'natata el ha'aron et ha'edut asher eten elecha. that the Aron is supposed to be the receptacle for the testimony, which again brings on the idea of the Mishkan as narrative, that at the center of the Mishkan, the holiest area of the Mishkan, is going to be occupied by this holy box covered in gold, which contains the tablets. Okay, so that you do not see that, but you are aware of that. You bring your little Israelite child and say, and the child says, "What's in there, Abba?" And you say, "In that structure there, way there, in the center where you cannot ever go, that's where the tablets are," or they were, or they weren't. But Barry, you have something to reflect on that the box is actually empty, or the box was
So
supposed to be empty.
Buber has this, what he calls the great paradox of the Bible, is that he understands the ark as being empty. And so you have a box, which is made of wood, that has borders, but it actually contains nothing. And that's what represents God. So God is at once everything and nothing all at once. Because without the box, there's nothing contained. But the box itself contains nothing. And when I first came across this many years ago, I thought it was such a beautiful understanding of how God could be both in the world and outside of it.
It doesn't work for me. I'm sorry. I want the stones to be in the box. I want the towel. I'm so driven by this idea of covenant, and that the covenant is represented by the tablets, and they're not big tablets. They probably look like floor tiles or something big, 12 by 12 floor, but they're in the box. And I don't think that the tablet number 1 is commandment 1 to 5, and tablet number 2 is commandment 6 to 10. I think that there are 2 copies of all 10, and that one's God's copy and one's the Jewish people's copy, and that they reside in the same safety deposit box there, and that has such a compelling meaning for it, despite the fact that it all gets destroyed. The tablets, are gone by this time in the Second Temple. Even the Ark is gone. There's nothing in the Holy of Holies during the Second Temple. That, I think, is, when the Romans came to destroy the temple, they went into the Holy of Holies. They saw nothing. That's the Midrash, right? That's
well, I mean, obviously, lots of midrashim, including some very daring ones. I mean, these are daring. There's the box with the kruvim on top, but the wings of the kruvim are like a throne for the invisible God. It's like a chair. The cherubs and their wings form a kind of a chair for the invisible God, maybe with the invisible books, stone books inside them. I mean, this is like incredibly poetically rich, and just stirring. I mean, I'll throw in another. Yes, this is no doubt the most important thing. It's the first commandment of all the accoutrements, and it's the last one related when it's the first commandment in Terumah of what you should do, but it's the last thing when they actually do it in Vayakhel Pekudei. It's the last one that gets inserted. So it is the climax. You gotta love the menorah. You gotta love this luminous. There's so much in Judaism that is the flaming tree. There's the burning bush, this luminous bush. There's the menorah, which is portrayed as being like, in Zechariah, the Haftarah for Hanukkah. It's also the Haftarah for Behalotecha. Is like the olive trees just flow into the tree that is the menorah, and it's portrayed as having kaftor vaferach, like the little balls in the flowers, like a tree, and it's all lit up. And that to me is also just a tremendously poetic description of what a sacred place brings to its worshipers. It lights up the darkness.
It's a bush that's not consumed.
Exactly.
God coming into the world and sustaining in the world without destroying the world. It's the nuclear reactor. It's everything. Okay. Well, you can see that we can go into lofty heights with the tremendous array of symbols in our Mishkan, and that, I think, is what reading the text does for us. It really ignites this imaginative journey. What was this? What did it mean? Who is it? What did they experience there? And that's some of the things that we just tried to share with you. We want to thank you for being with us. As always, it's great to have you. It's great to get your comments. We love sharing Torah with you. Please write to us, parshatalk@gmail.com, or comment on any of our YouTube or Facebook places. We appreciate every single one of your comments and every one of our readers, viewers, listeners. We love having you. It's great to share it with you. And we're going to see you next week in another edition of Parsha Talk. Thanks for joining us. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.